Welcome, true crime viewers, to a new episode of Crimes and Investigations. Today, we'll explore the story of a serial killer who shook the peaceful state of Alaska in the 1980s. The story of a man who lived a double life, a respected baker by day, and a hunter who killed women by night. This is Robert Hansen, known as the Butcher Baker or the Big Game Hunter. Robert Christian Hansen was born on February 15, 1939 in Iowa. His father was a Danish immigrant who owned a bakery. Robert grew up in a family that owned a bakery, and he worked there from a young age, which earned him the nickname the Baker later on. But Hansen's childhood wasn't easy. His father was a strict man. Although he was naturally left-handed, he was forced to use his right hand, which is believed to have contributed to a stutter that stayed with him throughout his life. In his teenage years, Robert was very shy and suffered from severe acne, which made him a target for teasing from his classmates. He was described as a loner, finding comfort in solitude. These bitter experiences created deep feelings of inadequacy and hatred towards the girls who rejected him. Hansen began to channel his anger and vengeful fantasies towards hunting, which he mastered and became passionate about. He enjoyed the peace and solitude of the forest and the feeling of power over ending a living being's life. In 1957, Hansen joined the U.S. Army Reserve for a year, hoping to change his life. After his discharge, he worked as an assistant coach and got married. But feelings of injustice and revenge continued to haunt him. In 1960, Hansen committed a shocking act, setting fire to a school bus garage as revenge for his feelings of unpopularity during his school years. He was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison, but he was released after 20 months. During his imprisonment, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and episodes of dissociation. His first wife also divorced him while he was in prison. After his release, Hansen remarried in 1963 and settled down with his second wife and had 2 children. In 1967, he decided to move to Anchorage, Alaska, seeking a fresh start. He opened a successful bakery and became known in the city as a quiet, kind man and a skilled hunter, even achieving record scores. But beneath this calm exterior, Hansen's inner self was dark. In 1971, he was arrested twice on charges related to the kidnapping and sexual assault of a woman and a prostitute. Thanks to plea bargains, he received reduced sentences and spent short periods in jail. These events may have emboldened him to escalate his crimes, believing he could get away with it. Starting in the early 1970s and until 1983, Alaska witnessed the disappearance of many women, especially sex workers and dancers. Initially, the police didn't pay much attention to these disappearances due to the transient nature of these women's lives. But as reports increased and bodies began to appear in various locations, suspicion arose that a serial killer was at work. Robert Hansen was that killer. For over a decade, Hansen kidnapped more than 30 women and raped and murdered at least 17 of them. He targeted lone women, charming them with offers of money for photos or sexual encounters. He made sure they arrived alone to ensure there were no witnesses. After kidnapping his victims, Hansen would hold them in his house or at a remote lodge, where he repeatedly tortured and raped them. Then he would tie them up and blindfold them, and transport them in his private plane to remote areas in the wilderness around Anchorage. Here, Hansen practiced his favorite hobby in a brutal way. He would release his victims into the woods and hunt them like game, armed with a rifle and a hunting knife. He enjoyed chasing them and hearing their screams before killing them. These horrific acts were apparently inspired by a short story called The Most Dangerous Game, where a wealthy Russian nobleman hunts humans for sport. In June 1983, Cindy Paulson, a 17-year-old sex worker, was kidnapped by Hansen. He held her captive and tortured her before attempting to transport her by plane to a remote area. But Cindy managed to escape from the plane and run for help. Cindy recounted her horrific story to the police and provided a detailed description of Hansen, his car, and his plane. Despite Hansen's prior run-ins with the law, his image as a respectable businessman and beloved baker initially made the police hesitant to consider him a prime suspect. But Detective Glenn Floth of the Alaska State Troopers was part of a team investigating the disappearance and murder of several women. in cooperation with the FBI and especially Agent John Douglas, who developed a psychological profile of the killer based on details from the bodies that were found. When confronted with the evidence, Hansen initially denied everything, but he eventually broke down and confessed to a series of attacks, kidnappings, rapes and murders dating back to 1971. He admitted to killing 17 women and raping about 30 others over a period of 12 years. In 1984, as part of a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty, receive a federal prison sentence, and limit extensive press coverage of the case details, Hansen agreed to disclose the burial locations of his victims. Hansen led investigators to 17 graves in and around south-central Alaska, and the remains of 12 victims were found. Some locations on the map remain undiscovered. Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years plus life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was incarcerated in several prisons before dying in 2014 at the age of 75 from natural causes. Robert Hansen's crimes shocked the entire Alaskan community, as he was seen as an ordinary and respectable man. It is widely believed that his actual victim count may be higher than 17. Despite the brutality of his crimes, Robert Hansen's name is not widely known outside of Alaska, partly due to the terms of the plea bargain, which limited media coverage. In 2013, a film titled The Frozen Ground was produced based on his case, which brought it back into the spotlight. Robert Hansen's story remains a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk behind ordinary appearances, and the devastating losses suffered by the victims and their families. Thank you for watching this episode. We hope this story has shed light on the details of this horrific case. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Goodbye until the next episode.